Welcome to Annunciation Radio's Faith with Reasons, the program that examines what the church teaches and why. Faith with Reasons.
Well, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us for this show. Show number 463 on September 27th. Faith with Reasons with me, Ron Finn, and Shayne Stanfield in the house, and we're back home in the studio.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Not bad. It's one of those days, we got some cloudy pattern. We got this, we're almost in October already.
Yeah.
So the weather is matching. It's kind of following suit so far, anyway. But
not too much rain today.
No, there's some coming, though.
Yeah.
So we know we'll find it. And then, of course, as you listen to the replay of this at 10 o'clock Saturday morning, it's probably going to be sunny and nice.
That's right.
So feel our pain for now.
Just look back to Wednesday. Yeah.
That's right. Coming up this Sunday, October the 1st. Yeah, October the 1st is coming, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Man. So it's Respect Life Sunday on October the 1st, and the Life Chain is taking place. This is done every year at St. Joe's Maumee with a prayer at 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the church, and then a roadside witness from 2 to 3. Now, what we do is we line up along the Maumee-Perrysburg Bridge.
Nice.
And we have signs and people praying rosaries, and people drive by and they honk their horn and wave. Most of them wave.
Most of them.
Some of them use all the digits of their fingers, and some of them only use select ones, but usually it's a lot of nice folks that are honking and waving and showing their support, and it ushers in, of course, Life Month. Mm-hmm. So Respect Life Month is October, and it always starts with that Life Chain, which again is coming up on October the 1st. So
you guys fill the
hope
bridge?
To see you there. What's that?
Do you fill the bridge?
About half of it.
Nice.
On both sides.
That's a decent-sized bridge, so that's great turnout.
Pretty good, and with all the construction in Maumee now, I don't know what it's going to be like, but
maybe a few orange barrels mixed in.
The bridge is okay, so there's no problem there.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. And you were at a wonderful event, last night?
Yeah.
For the Sisters of the Visitation?
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was packed.
Great.
It seems to me it was very successful, so...
Beautiful.
Yeah, wonderful event. Great food. So the food was prepared by a whole team of priests, and there were, I think, several that specialized in certain meals. So they had Italian, they had beef, they had seafood, and you just went to different stations and got small plates. It was almost like an hors d'oeuvre-sized meal.
Neat. Wow.
So
I can fill up on those.
And you could just keep going back.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, it was a great time, and again, it was for a great cause, and it appeared to me that it was quite successful.
What a neat event. Excellent. And this is the time of year where a lot of great stuff is taking place, so keep an eye on your calendars for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We have a great show today. We're gonna really crack open the Bible here as we welcome Professor Peter Sibilio, Ph.D. He's the director of MA, that's the Masters program in theology. He's the assistant professor of theological studies at Lourdes University. And, of course, you know him as host of the daily series Bible Basics here at Annunciation Radio, and of late, also a contributor on the Catholic Charities Annunciation Radio weekly program, Faith Alive, with your Social Justice in the Bible series, which is also excellent. So welcome, Professor Pete.
Well, they told me I was getting a little edgy on that one, so I don't know. I don't know if I have to dial it back a little, but I don't think so, because we have so many pressing issues, which is really, we talk about All Saints Day. Well, it's how we sanctify the world, right? We can't pull back on that, right? If we're going to keep the living word alive, sometimes, we got to be on edge a little.
Absolutely. And it's a great platform, really, too, to kind of bring people in, especially under the lens of social justice.
Absolutely.
And finding that in the Bible. And that's, I think, the more times you point out things that have their roots in biblical writings.
Well, of course, different words for justice appear throughout both Testaments, but it's really a Catholic concept to bring out how this justice always had a social element in the Bible, and the world kind of loses that. And so really, it's in the 1800s in Catholic teaching that we birthed the phrase social justice. And, then for about 50 to 100 years, it's kind of taken away from us and defined for us often as what it precisely is not.
I was going to say it's been hijacked.
It completely has. It absolutely has by almost everyone, because everyone realizes what a powerful concept it is. But we really need to remind people how truly Catholic and biblical it is.
Amen. A lot to cover. You just open the Bible, especially with the daily readings.
This list you gave me looks like comps. Day 1 and then day 5. And we're doing Old Testament day 1, and then we're doing All Saints Day.
That's true. It's really interesting. We like to get all over the place because that's how my mind works. That's all I can tell you. I'm kind of inspired by our daily readings and our Sunday readings. We really get treated to some books that we don't often have access to.
Yes, that's true.
And when I reached out to you, I said, what's with this Ezra? What's with this Haggai?
Haggai, well, a lot of these prophets have these names, and we're not sure if those were their birth names. Like Jewish tradition, we don't think there's enough evidence to say this now, but Jewish tradition often rightly notes that Malachi means my messenger, and some elements of Jewish tradition said that's really Ezra. It's just a title for Ezra himself. We don't really think that anymore, but it's interesting to see.
Interesting.
And with Haggai, again, his name
is that
means,
how you say it?
That's how I've heard of it.
Sounds good.
Well, it means my festivals, and we know from Ezra 5 that Haggai is a prophet in 520, but we're not told anything beyond that. And so we think he had a very short, profound career. And since his name means my festivals, he might have only spoken and really pounded the table from, say, the wheat festival, Pentecost in the spring, until the fall festival of booths. And so he's just nicknamed my festivals, the guy who was really talking a lot between my festivals.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and since we were talking so much about food off the air, I wonder how much he could get. So.
Wow. And each one of these really kind of brings their own unique perspective.
Definitely.
And makes us thinking, kind of digging into their words a little bit. We kind of get a sense of where they're going with it and what's our lesson in this.
Exactly, because they're always taking the best of their texts and traditions and applying that right to the headlines, like what's going on in our lives now and what is God's plan for us from the future. And I'll even tell my students that, one of the great things about the Old Testament is the people who bring it to you are not afraid to talk about their failures. It's as if they're teaching their children what to do by saying, here's what we got right and here's what we got wrong. We are as much tragedy as triumph. We are cautionary tale at times. Okay, learn from our mistakes. And you really see that with Ezra and Zechariah and Nehemiah because they're kind of at that sort of relaunch point. After exile, when Israel, whatever is left of her, kind of comes together and kind of constructs this memory of Israel 1.0 as a cautionary tale, right? As well as all the triumphant potential to sort of relaunch Israel 2.0, right? Look at all the potential we had, but look at where we blew it. We can't make those mistakes anymore, right? And that's right with really all of these figures you mentioned. Daniel's a little bit different because some of the stories do seem to go back to maybe the exilic period, but the book itself is written in 3 different languages and probably spans 200-300 years. And so they use the memory of Daniel and say, here's how you're supposed to be a faithful Jew during exile under Babylon. Here's how you're supposed to be a faithful Jew under Persia. And here's how you're supposed to be a faithful Jew under Greek domination. Right? And so even if the outside world is dominating and oppressing us, we have a hero like Daniel whom we can just sort of bounce through the ages who gives us these examples.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Now, it seems to me that there are others that are carried on, their books carry on. Isaiah isn't just one guy, right?
No, that's right. And Zechariah is like that, too. We see that the first chapters of his book really have to do with 520, a really broken Judea, a broken Jerusalem. Some of the children and grandchildren of the survivors of the war with Babylon are there living in this ghost town, and then here come the children and grandchildren of those who went into exile. And we are not even greatly on Persia's map yet. We kind of have to report to the Samaritans. We have no temple. Whatever was our city is completely torn down. Mm-hmm. What do we do now? And you get Zechariah prophesying right around 520 about what to do, but then his name is used toward the end of his book to kind of go apocalyptic. And it's probably written after that time period to say this world is so much bigger than we ever realized. Sometimes we suffer because we push God away by breaking covenant. But in this giant world that is often opposed to God, sometimes we suffer because we're keeping covenant. And the world will be against us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know today's readings, for example, is Ezra from the 9th chapter, when he talks about, in the evening sacrifice, I, Ezra, rose in my wretchedness, and with cloak and mantle torn, I fell on my knees, stretching out my hands to the Lord, my God. He is ashamed. He's ashamed and confounded.
Oh, yes.
And he's really kind of showing people that, we're slaves. We're servants of our God, but God has not abandoned us.
Well, one thing that Ezra brings out is something that we... Siren, there's my ride. No.
There's been a recent painting in the studio, so I like to leave the window open. Oh, yeah. Otherwise, we'll all get loopy because of the paint fumes.
I might have to leave early. Not unless it's a bill collector.
Yeah,
I think I'm okay.
Right.
Here, where's that sheet on the prophets? I'll pay him with that. But Ezra reminds us of something that we really forget. Speaking of guilt, is we often think it's just about us as individuals, but whole families, whole nations, at times whole churches can be off the mark. And Ezra reminds us that there's collective blessing, there's collective guilt, and we are partly responsible for the actions and identity of our group. And so he looks at the group around him and says, God's love endures, yet so do our sins. We can't keep going like this, people. We got to make some changes here. Right? And so he's not necessarily guilty about, something he did on his journey back personally, but he truly identifies with his people so much that their guilt becomes his.
So as far as the readings are concerned, are we staying in Ezra now for a while?
I think you get a number from that time period, I think.
Yeah.
Like you would be getting readings from Nehemiah as well as Ezra. We tend to kind of go in cycles.
Yeah, but they're hopping around a little bit, too.
Yeah,
we'll get Daniel, we'll get Nehemiah.
Right, and of course, Nehemiah, in Jewish tradition, and when you read the two books, it's Ezra Nehemiah as one book because so much of their material overlaps.
Oh
wow.
Are they're not consecutive in the Bible, are they?
Yes, they are.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they are. And in Jewish Bible, they're one book. It's like one of the things that always confuses students is, how many books are there in the Bible? Well, it depends who you ask. It's a little bit like counting the Ten Commandments. We have chapter and verse, but in no version of the Ten Commandments does God say, and this is the first commandment, and here is where it ends. And this is the second commandment, and here is where it ends. But if it weren't for people like Nehemiah and Ezra, we might not even have those commandments because they are so instrumental, both in rebuilding Jerusalem, but Ezra especially, in bringing Torah together finally in one place.
Wow. And it had been scattered prior to that because of the defeat of...
And it's interesting that you will hear, for instance, an earlier prophet like Amos bring up material that comes up in Torah, but he never cites any chapter or verse, and we don't even hear about the law of Moses much at all in the Old Testament until after Ezra and after the exile. And we don't hear about the 5 books of Moses, quote unquote, until almost Jesus' time. And it's really Ezra who crafts all of that and brings all of that together. And so you have different elements of Jewish tradition that will almost liken Ezra to another Moses. And some will say, well, Moses predicts a prophet to come in Deuteronomy. And some Jewish folks will say that must be Ezra. It's almost like there's 2 goalposts. Moses here, Ezra here, who finalizes all that Moses gave us and the traditions that come from that.
So was there any evidence that this was assembled prior to,
That's always, that's as much of a Torah question as an Ezra question. It sure would be nice if prophets who seem to be aware of the patriarchs, for instance, would cite the book of Genesis, but it's not really known as the book of Genesis until well after, certainly the exile. And that's when it starts to congeal in a shape like we know it. The $50 million question is, well, what is Ezra and this council he puts together? Which, again, the Talmud will say it's the beginning of the Sanhedrin. The Talmud claims that it's Ezra who starts this council of priests and scribes and prophets that will later become Sanhedrin. But that's always, the $50 million question. We know for sure that there were priests up and running in Jerusalem as soon as they had a temple, who were writing and saving massive amounts of materials. We know that there was this sort of a conglomerative group, some of whom could write, some of whom may have been part of that priesthood that that David and Solomon sort of removed. Jeremiah's family was part of that, and a sort of agrarian poor that kind of make common cause. And we say that they become very powerful when there no longer is a king in Israel. And then were there these things like a Yahwist narrative about Judah in the south and an Elohist narrative about Israel in the north, right? That's where, you wish you knew. But a lot of scholarship is saying, don't forget some of the reasons why you have 2 or 3 versions in Genesis of a common story is because a lot of this was oral, and you kind of have performance scripts, maybe not whole big written tracts, but you just have people performing and reperforming things over time that sort of stick. To use a common example, you remember the phrase, "You can't handle the truth."
Yeah.
Okay. The script that Rob Reiner wrote that they were rehearsing is "You already have the truth." That was what was written, but Jack Nicholson got the spirit, and he went with "You can't handle the truth. Who's going to do it? You, Lieutenant Weinberg." He just sort of went with it, even though the written script had something else, and then that became the new written script.
Yeah.
Right? And so you might have smaller sort of liturgical performance pieces all in there as well.
Wow, that's fascinating.
That is fascinating. Our guest, a familiar,
thank you for saying
familiar
that.
voice, Dr. Peter Sibilio, in studio with us for Faith with Reasons today. And for those that, I think last time you were on was in the summertime.
Yes, but I
maybe
picked the
early
6th.
Summer.
Yeah.
If you gave me some dates for Christmas, and I'll take December 6th.
December 6th, okay.
Yes.
Right. That's the Epiphany, isn't it?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just know that I will be buried in a whole bunch of wrong answers from students on final exams.
I think it was June.
Sounds right.
Yeah, that's about June.
Well, if I come back December 6th, not only will I be getting wrong answers, I'll be happy to share some of mine.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe every 3 months or so.
Now, last time you were on, though, I know we spent some time on Tobit.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And I know the reason I thought of that is because today's responsorial psalm
exactly.
is Tobit. But you know how the mind works. There aren't too many people that name their kids after some of these biblical names.
Ahasuerus.
Some people
just
do.
Doesn't come
it doesn't
very
ring.
Much.
You know, Isaiah is one thing, and, but and Joshua and Raphael.
Yep.
Yeah, but
and then you got to spell it. You know,
well, IT, right? Isn't that the old joke? Can you spell it without any R's? Right? IT.
But we it's amazing how these books and these prophets, they all kind of feed us now. For those that say, well, I don't even bother with the Old Testament, that's not relevant anymore. I just read the New Testament.
I don't see how you would get it.
Exactly. it doesn't connect otherwise.
Yeah, it's certainly far more profound than Bugs Bunny. But if you look at all the different Bugs Bunny cartoons, you really need to be culturally literate or you won't get half the jokes.
That's right.
And really what they're trying to do is keep this tradition alive in the New Testament, but say, look at the new life that has come. If you look at, say, Zechariah, right? So much of you got to think the author of Revelation reads Zechariah. I mean, we've got 4 horsemen. So many different references in Revelation come from Zechariah. So if people in the New Testament are poring over the Old Testament, well, we should too. Plus, when Jesus teaches about Bible, that's the Bible he's teaching about. Yeah. So if it's Bible for Jesus, it better be Bible for us.
And that's I guess that's something that's really, really important, that they were continuing to study what was written or what they knew, and at that time what was put together was the Old Testament.
Yes, exactly. So important that it's in at least 2 and even 3 different languages, even by Jesus's time. You have these sort of Aramaic targums coming online. You have Greek and you have Hebrew. Right, so they're really trying to say this belongs to us, but we're all over the world. And with Jesus's followers, that's when they say, and this belongs to the whole world, right? So that's why, again, you talk about the Old Testament, what they had, what they knew. It's very interesting that after you get past, say, Genesis 5. You don't hear much about Adam and Eve ever again in the Old Testament. Ezekiel will allude to it, but you hear more about Adam and Eve in the New Testament than you do the Old Testament. Wow. But you have to know the Old Testament, or it'll make no sense to you.
Yeah, you're right.
Is there
I'm sure there is
a theory behind that? I mean,
absolutely. Genesis kind of goes to great pains to say, well, you have creation. And it doesn't go so well. And then you have a second shot after Noah, and it doesn't go so well. And so God still does not give up hope, but he does something even more amazing and wants to bring blessing to a world so sorely needing it through the story of us. And that's why you get to Avram, who becomes Abraham, who is promised a lineage that will be a blessing to all nations. But then the children of Abraham freely admit, boy, do we mess up. And you get this family drama where the blessing to the whole world is sort of hanging in the balance. And so the focus then becomes on them and what they're getting right, what they're not getting right, what they should have gotten right. And Adam and Eve are kind of relegated to the storied past. Okay? But with folks like Ezekiel and Zechariah and parts of Daniel, you get this sort of apocalyptic imagination where somehow God is going to make everything right, going all the way back to Adam and Eve. And so Paul has something to pick up on when he says, well, we have a new Adam. Just like the first one, we were plugged into the tree of life and he turned away from God and unplugged us. Well, now Jesus picks up that plug and turns us all back to God and plugs life in again.
Oh, yeah.
And
I love that, yeah.
I use that on the show, so, no one complained. That must be good.
So
I didn't get $100,000 like that loaf of bread you were talking about.
So there is a we see that Old Scripture Old Testament is quoted in the New Testament.
Yes, and by the time of the New Testament, you start to at least have books like Matthew can say according to the prophet Isaiah. Okay, So you can at least know by then there was a prophet with a scroll, Isaiah, that was well known. Or Jesus can get up in the synagogue and read from the scroll of Isaiah. Okay, but even the author of Hebrews will have to say, well, somewhere in Scripture it says, right? And not give you chapter and verse, because I know we don't like to think this way, but chapter and verse are really our invention.
Came much later.
Quite literally to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah. So there's and I know we probably talked about this maybe 2 or 3 times ago that we had you here, but you know, we have the Protestant Bible and we have the Catholic Bible, and we have a number of books of the Old Testament that are missing, but, including
part of your favorite, Daniel. Right? We have Catholics will have a longer version of Daniel, and some Eastern Orthodox will have an even longer version. Because Catholics and Orthodox will recognize those parts of Daniel, like the story of Susanna, Bel, and the dragon, where Daniel's in the lion's den for the second time, Daniel 13, as Scripture, whereas Protestants will say, well, if it was written in Greek, we got to get rid of it. That sort of thing.
And that was the deciding factor. It was,
and again, Jewish folks didn't have it in Hebrew, so it was a way to sort of sift. Okay, and so you won't find it in Hebrew, but you find it in early Greek copies of the Old Testament, certainly in the Septuagint. It's interesting. The earliest sort of almost complete Greek version of the Old Testament is actually in an early Christian Bible called Bible or Codex Sinaiticus. And we found another one also from the 300s that's in the Vatican, so it's called Codex Vaticanus, and that too, almost complete Old Testament, but in Greek.
So the predominant language back then was Greek?
Yes. That is, it's one of the reasons why Daniel will sort of keep popping up, even as late as, we'll say, the Seleucid Greeks. They're only called Seleucids because General Seleucus gets part of Alexander's conquest, a part of his territory, because as we know, Alexander goes to Afghanistan, his troops won't fight anymore, and he says, I better go back to Greece, and mysteriously doesn't make it, and it's like an ancient world Kennedy conspiracy. Who killed Alexander, or did he just die? And so all the territory that he conquers is sort of quartered.
Okay.
And so when Daniel will talk about this he-goat with a massive horn, that's why he says the horn split into 4. To talk about the 4 corners of Alexander's kingdom.
Oh, okay.
He never got to rule.
Well, pick that back up on the other side.
Absolutely.
The more I hear from you, the more I realize I didn't know too much before you walked in the room, so I'm glad you're here.
Well, like I said, I got notes here. Notes.
No, but you're not even looking at them. It's amazing. Faith with Reasons will return with Dr. Peter Sibilio. RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, is a journey of faith. If you're interested in joining the Catholic Church, want to learn more about the faith, if you've missed receiving a sacrament as a child, baptism, reconciliation, Eucharist, or confirmation, or if you've been away from the church and you would like to ask questions about the church today, RCIA is for you. If you or anyone you know is interested, please contact your parish office and ask about RCIA.
This is the day. This is the theme for this year's annual Catholic Appeal. Hello, everyone. Bishop Daniel Thomas here. Day by day, all of us are blessed by our Lord, and we know that as Catholics, we're charged with sharing our blessings with others. Your participation in our annual Catholic Appeal brings immediate help to individuals and families in crisis with food, counseling, care, and compassion. Your gift assists in Catholic education of our young people, promotes our priestly vocations, provides liturgical resources throughout our diocese, and so much more. This is the day. I invite you this day to please give generously to our annual Catholic Appeal at your parish or online at acatoledo.org. So grateful for your generosity to our annual Catholic Appeal. We depend on your goodness. God bless you.
Come fill your tummy and your soul at the Catholic Business Network's breakfast Thursday, October 5th from 7 to 9 at St. John the 23rd. Get set to hear Most Reverend Daniel E. Thomas, Bishop of the Diocese of Toledo, as he presents Having Courage to discuss moral issues in the workplace. Morning Offering will also be broadcasting live, and best of all, breakfast is free. To register, go to eventbrite.com and reserve your seat today.
Now, back to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
Hey, welcome back here. Shayne Stanfield, Ron Finn, and today we have Professor Pete Sibilio here in studio with us. He's Director of MA in Theology, Assistant Professor of Theological Studies at Lourdes University, and host of the daily series Bible Basics. So you'll recognize his voice if you're a frequent listener here at Annunciation Radio.
Better than his face?
Yeah.
Better than
Well, we're all better behind the mic. There's no video here. Also contributes to social justice in the Bible, and that's heard on Catholic Charities. Also here weekly at Annunciation Radio with the Faith Alive program. And before the break, we were discussing Greek. How Greek.
I want to get a plug in.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
We actually have, and we'll go right back
to
Greek. We have no charge, free, if you're interested in learning combined Koine Greek, or probably they might say it's something like Kini, the language of the Septuagint and the New Testament, along with classical Greek. Learn the two of them side by side. We're doing it on Tuesdays, free. Anybody who wants to come to Lourdes.
Well, that's a great plug.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can get in touch with me through Lourdes or through the station. It is free. You do have to buy the books, two books, but no tuition. And as far as I know, parking is pretty close to free. No charge whatsoever. We just want people to come. Your tuition is you do the homework. That's it.
That's neat.
So this is every Tuesday?
Every Tuesday. It should have started already, but we're arguing about the time. Some people want early, 4:30. Other people want a little later. So it's probably going to be 5:30. If you have to come late, come late. If you have to leave early, leave early.
So and the title of this is what? It's all Greek to me.
You could yes. And so we'll use a really classic book about New Testament Greek, and then we'll also use a very classic textbook that you would get if you're going to do Attic Greek. Not quite the same, but that goes right back to.
Interesting. That's great. So that'll be starting soon.
Yes, as soon as we can agree on. We got the night down, and we can't change the night because everybody will freak at that point. But yes, as soon as we can agree on a time, it's probably going to be around the dinner hour because that's when the most people could come.
Sure.
But no tuition. You can't really get academic credit for it unless you insist on paying. But if you were going to use this, especially younger people, or if you're going on for a degree, what would normally happen is, let's say you go up to U of M, they would say, well, you say that you took this Greek class and the instructor says you took the Greek class. We'll give you a competency test. And so they'll give you something like a passage from Galatians, and as long as you can translate it, you go into Greek 2 and not Greek 1.
I see.
Wow, fascinating.
And they usually let you use a dictionary too, so it's not
nice.
It's not going to be those aren't. It kind of helps them if you already know something.
Very cool. So. Yeah, very cool. So, we've got the Greek language is what you would say pretty prolific, and in throughout the area at the time. So I get back to what we were discussing in the first half. I mean,
I'm on my 18th year of Greek 1. That's all I'll say. Or 20th year of Greek 1, or 22nd year. Started in high school, so it's been a lot of years. You're never done with Greek 1. Let me just tell you.
But if they focused on only the works that were in Hebrew and they jettisoned the Greek, it doesn't make sense to me because it was the more accepted language.
Right, yes. And it really is the language of the New Testament and of the church that produces the New Testament, specifically because they want it to go viral.
Yeah.
And even
and again, when you say viral, it made sense to do it in Greek because most everybody was speaking it or could speak it. Yeah.
A couple shows ago, I was like, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz v'tohu v'vohu. Okay, well, who knows what that means anymore, right? Even Jewish folks didn't know that those were the very first lines of, well, maybe they did because they were so special, the first lines of Hebrew Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was a formless void, and a great wind hovered over the face of the earth. And then God said, and if you don't know that, how can it be real to you? If that's not a language you speak, how can it be real to you? It would be even more pronounced than, say, Latin to younger Catholics, because a lot of younger Catholics really like either New Rite or Old Rite Latin Mass. But so it would be even less accessible and far more foreign, say, to a Jewish person living in Greece.
Oh.
Right? I maybe never even heard much Hebrew at all. So how could you imagine talking about something that now belongs to the world in a language that isn't even spoken anymore?
Yeah. And again, you're making reference to Hebrew.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, you think, remember, now we're consciously going back to Adam, right? And so if you are related to Adam, Jesus relates to you because everyone dies in Adam. If you die, okay, this Jesus stuff relates to you and it belongs to you. And so we have to use the language that people would know just to get people into this plan.
So when somebody's studying Greek and they're looking at Greek translations and trying to figure out if something may have been translated correctly, the correct thing to do would be to go back to Aramaic.
Wow, that is another $100,000 question because
Shane, your questions are getting more expensive by the way.
I know. It's, bread. We had a loaf of bread at auction for $100,000 or something. But talk about dough. We have to remember that just the act of writing made something special because most people could neither read nor write. Most people could listen far better than we could and tell stories better than we can. And so that is how words spread. So it's difficult to say, well, what did Jesus say in Aramaic that then later gets written down in Greek? There's this classic exercise with the Lord's Prayer. That really sort of brings this to the fore. Jesus must have spoken it in his particular dialect of Aramaic. We have two versions of it in Matthew and Luke, both in Greek, but they're not exactly the same. And so we always puzzle over, well, what would those original Aramaic words that then go in two slightly different but very similar Greek directions, what would that Aramaic have been?
Well, I know that there's that pretty infamous Protestant argument about what did Jesus do with Peter? You are a rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And they go back to I think they were going back to maybe it was Hebrew. I don't recall, but there was something about the term. I think it's kefa, and they make this argument that it's a small rock, and it's not. They don't.
That's part of the. The mistake was where they would say a Greek word, which could mean pebble.
Yeah.
But Jesus didn't speak Greek.
Right.
He spoke Aramaic, and if he's looking at someone and addressing that person, he would say kefa.
Yeah.
Okay. He was kind of the first person to look at Simon and say, "Yo, Rocky." And in his language, "Yo, Rocky" was kefa.
Yeah.
Right? Which basically does mean rock. It could be a small rock, very often a large rock. It means rock. Rocky. Okay. Well, then you have a choice. You can either take, as the New Testament sometimes does, and take the letters, the Greek letters, that would approximate kefa in Aramaic and just put kefa into Greek letters. And that's where we get Cephas. Or you can try to translate kefa from Aramaic to Greek, and that's where we get Petros.
Okay, yeah. And I guess that's where I was going with my question regarding Aramaic, because we run a I think it's Bible forensics.
Yes,
and they talk about that, because the correct thing to do would be to take the Greek and go back to the Aramaic.
And that's one of the reasons why that argument isn't brought up too much anymore, is because, well, all right, the argument wasn't that great. Right. Okay. There are other ways to sort of, question Petrine authority, but that is not one of them. And the languages help us there.
Yeah. Very good.
It's always good when the language is helpful.
To do all that work and then you just come up with what often happens, it's difficult to say. Well, we had that. We had that just a couple Sundays ago with, you missed the forest on account of the trees. You'll notice we get some translations where Jesus will say, forgive 70 times 7 or 77 times, right?
Yeah.
And that comes down to a sort of Greek problem.
Oh.
How are you going to deal with the Greek? And we did that one on Bible Basics, so you've got to listen in to find the answer.
Oh, yeah.
That was a toughie, really, because I kind of
archived there if you go to on demand and look for Bible Basics.
Well, I remembered the problem, so I was happy to get the question, but then I'm like looking up things like Greek multiplication and Greeks who wrote about math, and I'm like, I don't even like math. This is ridiculous. I got into such trouble here.
Peter Sibilio, our guest here on Faith with Reasons, and it's no surprise we're talking about the Bible here today. And
that and bread is all I know.
That's what more do you need, right? And of course, with the studies at Lourdes, this free Greek classes that are coming up. But you're also, are you in the middle of a cohort for the master's program? Are you forming one? Or
we're always trying to form one. We have to see what the new president says, right? If it's always difficult to get 15 people who are ready to agree on one night and go at the same time. And so if you know 15 people, or if you are one of the 15 people, stop by Greek class for sure. And, we can talk. That might be a way to get things going is Greek is the free sample.
Nice.
And let me say, you could get something on your transcript officially, but
to get a master's,
and so that would be great if that happens.
Especially in theology.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Really, any type of master's is so marketable, but with theological study, if you look back at how that has been used, even by Jews before Jesus, right? It is excellent preparation for any type of speaking, any type of legal work, any place where you have to do a lot of writing and research and build the few muscles left that AI cannot duplicate.
Amen.
Nice.
Right? You can never be outsourced.
That's a terrific selling point.
Yeah.
Pete, we're coming up on All Saints and All Souls.
No. Uh-oh.
It's just check your watch, because we're getting very close to it. Well, we're a month away, but, November 1st and 2nd.
Plenty of time to look at the clock at 7 p.m. and say, oh, no! I remember one time, I forget which holy day it was, but I was, again, just swamped at work, and sure enough, it was late in the evening, and I remembered it was a holy day. And when I went to confession after missing, Father said, well, if you honestly forgot, it's, not going is not a sin, but why did you forget? If someone said there's $1 million for you at church, we'll say on November 1st, you wouldn't have forgotten.
No, you might have
that you would not have forgotten.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, so I could quit my job. I would have been busy at work. I would teach for free. I truly would. And if you see my paycheck, I'm pretty close.
Yeah, but you got that tip jar.
That's right. People think that's just an empty coffee cup. That's the problem. That's the way it stays.
Yeah.
Now, coming up in October, I want to talk a little bit about Respect Life Month.
Oh, very big.
And we know that the Bible is a book of life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It speaks to the protection of human life and the proliferation of creatures and so forth.
Absolutely.
But there, as we kind of get into the month of October and think about this, of course, the 40 Days for Life campaign kicks off today and runs into November, like November 5th. So signing up is a great thing to do for that. And if you want something to dwell on while you're there are some terrific Bible passages that are kind of go-to, right?
And, I I really never have time to bring this up on Bible basics. And of course, Bible is foundational, right? We have to have it. It's canon. It's a measuring stick for our faith, both as individuals and as a church. But as Catholics, we have the church. So we don't have to play, well, I have to find 18 verses in the Bible or it absolutely doesn't exist. Because we have that whole wonderful tradition. And so what the church has always been doing and what is doing now is revelatory. And that speaks right with the Bible about the sanctity of all human life. Together, one voice. Second, sometimes things don't come up in the Bible because it seems self-explanatory. There's
right.
no passage in the Bible that says 2 + 2 is 4. Don't forget that. Okay? Before Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, he warmed up with a little math. 2 + 2 is 4. Memorize that because you never figure that out on your own. Okay? And it's sad that sometimes we have to go back to things that don't even make, a top 10 list of commandments.
Yeah, that's true. Why would you have to explain that,
But speaking of commands, what is the very first command, not in the Decalogue, but the first command that God gives anybody? The very first mitzvah, right? You've heard of the mitzvot, the mitzvah in the singular. The first command that God ever gives anybody is male and female, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Right? The exact opposite of abort and go home. Right? Even before you have an Adam and an Eve, you have male and female. In that sense, the first commandment is respect and propagate life. You alone among all the creatures of this world have my image, and I want you to procreate by spreading that image. I'm giving you that trust. I'm giving you that sacred superpower. Now go do it.
Wow. And that's right to the very beginning.
First thing we're ever told to do. People who complain about the rules, well, that's rule 1. So if you want a rule, how about the first one? Okay? Even before we're told, don't touch that tree over there, Even before, right, the snake starts, puts up a fruit stand. Okay, even before all that, right, is share life and my image. Don't smash it.
Wow, that's a great point.
Thank you. It just came to me. And of course, we talked about Jeremiah, and I formed you in the womb, and I knew you from then, and I set you apart for this. And Paul repeats it for himself, so it must be important. But even that, we were talking about at the very beginning of Israel. They tell stories about how all of their mothers, they don't really have words for grandfather, grandmother, and so Sarah can be our mother. Rebecca can be our mother. Rachel can be our mother. They all had difficult births. Okay? They all had problem pregnancies. They all had challenges. Yet the very life that becomes Jesus comes out of those struggles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point. Excuse me, what you said earlier that just because it isn't said in the Bible doesn't.
Yes.
I mean, and that as far as we're concerned, now that we're starting 40 Days for Life, I believe it's correct that abortion isn't specifically prohibited in the it isn't called out in the.
It's seen as something ugly, like Paul will talk about, the sort of ugliness he had, and he's like, I came to the faith almost like an abortion, so you can tell it's known, but it's something ugly.
Something ugly.
Yeah, something that God and only God can really turn around. And that means we can't get in the way of that by just being judgmental and not helping people who are struggling with these questions. Because especially in Genesis, a lot of times it's the men who are ready to give up and the women are the heroes.
Yeah, that's right.
Because this is, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but it seems to me that I heard it previously that the practice of abortion was being done by the Romans.
Oh yes,
I mean it was something that
that's right.
I mean people were sacrificing, the pagans were sacrificing babies and things like this, but they actually had a means to abort a baby.
Yes,
however they did it back then, so it was something that was done,
and it was simply regarded as exactly one of those poster child reasons of, no pun intended, of why we have to be the difference. Mm-hmm. Okay, of why we have something like our Torah and our traditions, and then certainly how this is just an amazing gift of new life in Christ. I mean, Mary had a pretty difficult pregnancy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
What if?
Yeah.
Right? Right? And so that's the person we have to look to, and are we going to help Mary on her journey by helping women who are wrestling with these questions, especially when a lot of them don't have a Joseph?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think these are great points because I've heard it time and time again with the subject of abortion and in other things that are taking place in the culture today. So many people will say, "Well, this isn't talked about. Jesus didn't call this out and specifically say, don't do this. And this is it's twisted and it's they'll say, well, it was being practiced back then. So if it was such a horrific thing back then, why isn't it talked about in the Bible? And so it may not. So it shouldn't be such a bad thing today. The culture, it twists this and rationalizes it.
Well, he didn't call out child sacrifice at all.
Right, right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He didn't have to.
Right,
yeah. If anyone had a difficult pregnancy, it was his mother.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so it's really up to us to be Joseph to all of those young mothers who don't have a Joseph, right? We talked about Ezra and collective guilt. It's so much easier to cast the first stone than it is to help someone up. But that's exactly what Jesus does.
Mm-hmm.
So good argument for that because it's not specifically discussed in the Bible. We could use these passages in the Bible and say that the Bible is talking about life. It's not talking about.
Remember what we often call the first Christian martyrs are in Matthew. Mm-hmm. The babies Herod kills.
Oh yeah,
and we're told that Rachel weeps for her children, and that's why we have a Project Rachel, because Rachel is still weeping.
Yeah.
Right. She wept back then for those first people. Really, Jesus dies for us. Those children died in his place. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just look at that story, and there's no way abortion could ever be anything that's celebrated as this triumph for what Jesus would know about and condone.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense.
I've always had a special affinity for, I believe it's Psalm 139, where it said, "I knitted you in your mother's womb."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
I was formed, by his fingers, basically.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. And if we get to the we know the transgender and the school stuff is coming right after. Right, we passed this legislation just the way they worded it. You can trust me on this, folks. Right, I have to look at texts and interpret them all the time. The very next thing, right? If we let abortion on demand come, just the way they phrase that legislation is transgender for everyone in the schools. You just know that's coming.
Yeah,
and we have even outside the scriptures, right? We have so much science that talks about human life beginning at conception, about how horrible these surgeries are, especially for young people. Yeah. Weren't we told no MASS? You have to trust the science, that sort of thing. Weren't we told you got to trust the science, MASK instead of MASS?
Yeah.
Well, why can't we trust the science now?
Yeah.
Right.
Why are we being judgmental when we say we're going to trust the science on this one?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
Unless it's just that old devil selling fruit in the garden again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're too eager to bite.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And October is a great month for us to stand up and be firm.
Amen.
Push back against.
Does that mean we're not going to get to All Saints Day?
We should. We're barely into October, so yeah.
And Zechariah, you talked about guardian angels.
Yeah.
The first part of Zechariah, that part that we say we know comes right from him, he has a guardian angel who is giving him these visions and then interpreting them, right? And so we get to see that guardian angel. He's not called guardian angel, but there would be no Zechariah if he weren't being guarded and guided by this angel who tells him these things and says, and here is what this giant scroll means. Incidentally, exactly in the length of Solomon's portico. It's time to rebuild that. So,
wow,
great stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's adventurous, and it's also so telling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like we said, so much of this will come up with Christians as they're trying to make sense of their world. We hear about Zechariah talking about a future king who, on the one hand, there seems to be war, but this restoration of the Messianic dynasty will actually come riding on a donkey, the foal of an ass, right? That doesn't come from Palm Sunday. That comes from Zechariah that then Jesus fulfills. But thank you, Zechariah, and that angel for giving you this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Oh, man. Now, see, I would never thought of that for All Saints Day. All Saints Day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we really see throughout both Testaments, anything set apart for God is holy. And so when we talk about saints, when we talk about relics, when we talk about vestments and things like Mass, we're not lessening the power of Christ. We're saying it's Christ who gives us the power to sanctify our lives and everything around us. Talk about Christ as mediator.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's using us as tools and channels of this divine energy. So we got a lot to celebrate on All Saints Day, and we're all souls. And so that is for us too.
In the very fact that they're saints, they had done something miraculous in their life.
For your homework,
yeah,
let's all just meditate on that beautiful litany of the saints.
Oh yeah,
they're cheering for us.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
The great cloud of witnesses.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I love that.
We say it's a parade of the saints going by. Well, they're looking at us and cheering us on.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's amazing.
That's a great note to close up the show with, too.
Already?
Comes on
yeah, that music.
Where's the siren?
Professor Peter Sibilio, so great to have you here again.
I can't
You're
wait till
coming back in December.
6th. Yes,
December 6th.
Exactly.
Gee, what do you want to talk about?
I hear we need a little Christmas.
Ah, yeah.
Nice.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do Easter.
And I'll just say,
Right.
and so timely. You know, I mean,
I know. All right, great to have you back on again, and keep listening for Bible Basics, and don't forget to check out the past, podcast for those as well.
Please do.
Thanks for joining us on Faith with Reasons.